Chambo and Karibu from bright and sunny Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. I'm Jagriti Bista from Hindsight Ventures, the Africa-focused vertical of Startup Rezo. It gives me a great pleasure in hosting you all at the inaugural edition of the East Africa Corporate Innovation Summit. We have had a great response from the ecosystem, and we look forward to an amazing 2 days here at the summit. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge DOT Tanzania for graciously having us at their offices for hosting the summit. So, well, as the name goes, Corporate Innovation Summit, corporates, they can be the proverbial gorillas, big and mighty and not so agile, is what you'd think. But as you will hear from one of our keynote speakers, gorillas can dance. The East Africa Corporate Innovation Summit is all about keeping corporations at the core and building a platform for enabling dialogues with the other key stakeholders of the startup ecosystem. We have a packed agenda lined up for you, in addition to hearing from industry leaders on the areas of innovation, digital transformation, startup engagements, and more. We will also be hosting the demo day of our Waza Challenge East Africa cohort, and we also have around 25 emerging tech startups exhibiting at the event. And I feel that every one of you should visit their booth. So, without any further delay, I'd like to introduce you all to our keynote for the day, Mr. Abdi Mohammed, the Managing Director and CEO of Apsa Bank Tanzania Limited. Over to you, Abdi.
Thank you very much, Jagruti, for having me here, and I'm very happy to join the East Africa Corporate Innovation Summit. I wish you a good day, and I'm sure it will be a very interesting set of discussions today. Um, as I was looking at the website and preparing for the event, and looking at the other speakers who will be there and the topics that will be covered, etc., I came across a very interesting statement there, which is a familiar statement to many of us, that says, necessity is the mother of invention. That was one of the headlines that I saw in your banners for the event. And it reminded me of the most powerful recent example of that statement, which is the discovery of the vaccine for COVID-19, and how short that period was. If you go back to the history of vaccine making in the world, on average, vaccine development takes 15 to 20 years of research, testing, and then final approval. Some have actually taken a lot longer in the past. So, smallpox, for example, which used to be a real problem in the past, took over 100 years before a vaccine was found. This week and the past few weeks, there's been a lot of news in Africa about the discovery of the malaria vaccine. And I was just checking up when they started this work. And the first tests for a malaria vaccine in the world were done in 1967, before 2 years before I was born. And for as long as I have lived, it means there is a researcher somewhere that has been working on malaria vaccination. And then you compare that to COVID-19. Mid last year, the world was in a very difficult place. The US and other major economies, and Africa as well, had lost a lot of people. There were a lot of unknowns about the future, and many countries, including the US, launched high-speed programs for vaccine development. And in a short period, 7-8 months, we have a vaccine and several versions of it all over the world that are being used. And the question is, why? How did this one take 8 months to be done to a good level that offers good protection? And smallpox took 100 years. Influenza, they started testing in 1910. It was launched in 1945, etc. What is the difference? And is that limited to medical? Or if we expand it to the rest of the innovation ecosystem, what do we see? And I personally believe that that acceleration that has been caused by COVID-19 and the events of the last 2 years will have far-reaching repercussions in the field of innovation, digitization. A lot of the repercussions are positive. It injects, new energy, new speed, and anybody in this ecosystem, whether it's a large corporate like ourselves or a fintech startup, or indeed any of the players in the system, in my opinion, should look at that as a big change in the world. There is the pre and there is the post. And as we look at the presentation, I'll spend a very few minutes really covering a few highlights. This is the context in which we are presenting. The first thing I wanted to talk about is, a few slides that cover what you can call, the case for change, the case for innovation. What are the reasons or rationale that drives it? And I've just had a few quotes there. Jack Welch is known to many people, not a leader of this current generation, but a very successful executive in General Electric for many years. And there are a few comments there on what he said on change. The one I like the most, personally, is the one about the rate of change on the outside. And he says, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, and he's talking about an organization, then the end is near. If the surrounding world is changing faster than you are, then it's just a matter of time. And this is something that, especially as large corporations, we should think about, and should drive what we do on an ongoing basis. He also talks about the ability to learn and translate that learning into action rapidly, being a competitive advantage. And this really speaks to innovation, learning and implementing the action, and implementing it rapidly. That rapidly is a very key word. Speed, is of great essence. Another, writer in this field, Tom Peters, he wrote a famous book called In Search of Excellence, that has been here for a long time, and he continues to write and present. And here are a few words that he has said on innovation. He says innovation is strategy. Not innovation is a good part of a strategy. No, it is strategy, and it's a key in developing a competitive edge for any company. Innovation in itself, that ability to learn and to develop and to continuously self-improve, is a competitive advantage by itself. And a few good comments there from Tom Peters, a man that I have read a lot of his work. Then closer home, we are in Africa. There are a number of African leaders that talk a lot about innovation and change. In Tanzania, our leader, our president, Mama Samia Suluhu Hassan, quite recently actually addressed herself to this whole issue of cryptocurrencies, and directed people in the financial system to look at what it means for the country and what can be done. And for me, in the African continent, is one of the few heads of state that I have seen talk directly about these matters of digital innovation, banking the unbanked, financial inclusion, etc. Down there on the left, we have Strive Masiyiwa. He's a well-known Zimbabwean entrepreneur, founder of Econet, and now really not just Zimbabwean, but global entrepreneur based in London. I saw about a month ago that he has joined the board of Netflix, and he writes a lot on this issue of change and innovation. And he's one of the most, approachable entrepreneurs. I've seen him mentor many young people, and I would urge, just read up on him. There's some good stuff there. And we also have Ashish Taka, Ugandan-born investor, UK-based as well. And what on the World Economic Forum list of young leaders, I think in his 30s at the moment, running the Mara Group, which is one of the largest groups in the continent. Um, and he has written and said a lot about the subject of change and innovation, and he's invested in many startups as well. So there's a few powerful voices. These are just the examples of leaders that are driving this change and innovation agenda. um, Quickly, just building on that case for digital innovation, there is a what you can call the survival case, that there is an imperative to innovate and to improve and to develop. Otherwise, the survival may be an issue. I looked at the list of the top 500 companies in the US in the 1950s, and there were names like General Motors, ExxonMobil, Procter and Gamble, and some of those names, even at that time, were over 60 years old. Bethlehem Steel, etc. You fast forward to today, and you look at the same 500, and the top names are almost all of them new. So there are some of the older ones, but most of the top names, Apple, Facebook, Alphabet, the company that runs Google, um, and others, Amazon, etc. And these are mostly tech companies that haven't been there before. They are new. The average age of companies in that list today is 20 years, down from 60 years just a few years ago. And if you project that forward, you ask yourself, what will that average age be, as we move into the future? So there is a survival component to digital innovation. But if you look at that Forbes story that is there on the right, it also talks about the opportunity side of it. There is a growth imperative on why a company like Apsa or any of the other large corporates should be innovating and should be part of the new revenue opportunities that are there. And just in the COVID period, over 700 billion of new revenues getting created in this whole platform and tech economy. So again, a very important area that we need to look at. I was reading a book on corporate innovation. I have it here, that gives the examples down here. And most of the examples are Alphabet, Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft. Microsoft is the oldest company they talk about. And so that exponential nature of this will continue. And there will be many companies that are in the works today through this startup ecosystem that will be in this list in the future. And that's why we continue to be interested in this process. I've listed a few other, reasons for the digital innovation in banking. Cost, efficiency, automation is a big factor. This whole area of customer experience and what you deliver from a client experience perspective is critical. In our case, in Apsa, we have it as one of our brand headlines that we are a digital and innovative company. And so once you put it into the brand promise, that is a commitment that you need to carry into the market and show that we are taking leadership in this field. There is also all the change happening in the ecosystem. Remember the Jack Welch comment about the environment outside changing faster than inside. So you have to keep up with that environment as well. There is a whole issue of talent. In this day and age, it's not just salary or the brand colors that attract people. People also look at what is the company's attitude, what's the culture, what is the company's approach to innovation. And people feel proud to join entities that do well in the area of innovation. I see always on social media, on LinkedIn, when people join Google, on the first day, they go there, they take a picture on the big sign, and they say, "Today I joined Google." Why? Why do they publicize? And that is part of what you have to deal with as a large organization. What is your approach to innovation? And how does that sit with the market in terms of attracting people? And then there is the whole area of capital and investment. Investors now think sustainability. And there is the question of how much of a competitive edge do you have in innovation? Because that says something about the company as a going concern, and the survivability of it. So big case for change, definitely. And I know I'm talking to the converted. I'll skip through some of these definitional aspects of digitization, and maybe spend 1-2 minutes on this slide, which speaks to, it's mainly focused on banking and the fintech side of the world, but I think it's applicable to other areas as well. And it's the ecosystem as a whole. What are the key areas that we are looking at? The whole area of robotics, artificial intelligence. It's something that banks, airlines, and service providers are looking at, using robotics for basic query management, dealing with client, information, um, sharing things like flight data, etc., for airlines. Those are now all being robotized, and we are looking at this Apsa ourselves, in Tanzania, looking at this as an option. And then there is the platforms, and they are all over the place. Some are big, like Amazon, but there are smaller platforms in the continent as well that are dealing with different areas. How do we, as a banking and financial services sector, become part of that, and where do we fit in? That's another key area that we are looking at. There is the emergence of all-in-one ecosystem plays, how we different players from different industries, bank, airline, hotel, university, etc., in dealing with this one client, can have end-to-end kind of service offerings and solutions. There is the open architecture, open API, allowing fintechs, innovators, access to our systems. Of course, in the banking world, that is subject to a lot of regulation, but increasingly we are opening up to that idea. And this open architecture, piece is going to be a very important one as we move forward. And then it links into the whole area of innovation, partnership. A few years ago in the banking industry, we viewed telcos as competition, as competitors. And, the level of coordination and collaboration was not high. But today, if you look at some of the, partnerships we have done as Apsa here in Tanzania, Kenya, Ghana, Zambia, with major telcos to deliver services to the customer in partnership. And this is something that is likely to continue going forward. There is also the whole issue of hyper personalization, what we call the segment of one. And this speaks to the issue of data, using deep data and analytics to move from just classifying customers into broad portfolios like high net worth, retail, SME, etc., to having data to the level of a single customer that can tell you this gentleman or lady travels 12 times a year, goes to these countries, requires these services, etc. Because then you move away from broader categorization to specific product offerings that are based on the client's needs. So that whole area of data and how we can use data better is going to be quite important going forward. So that's the big picture. And lastly, I just wanted to share a few messages on what we have done in Apsa Tanzania in the last few years, as we continue to digitize the bank, as we continue to improve the service offering that we have. We have been paperless, and that is completely 100% paperless in our branches since 2014. Other entities have done it as well now. We've done a lot of work on managing the service aspect of our branches. I just talked about the chat banking, the chatbot. That is something that is also in the works. We've done a platform for SMEs, and just this week I met a startup that is looking at this agriculture kind of thing and building a platform for them. and there's a lot of integration and things like that that will be required going forward. A lot of online solutions for our corporate clients as well, and some really good work that we have done in terms of creating that digital persona for the organization. And I believe that the market views us as such. Just last week we won an award from the ICT ministry in the government of Tanzania as the best bank in terms of using ICT and using technology to deliver services and to continue innovating. So, we will continue working on it. As I said, this is a continuous process. It's a journey, but I just thought I'll share with you some of the things that we are doing, just bringing it home in terms of what does it mean in a practical terms, this whole idea of digitization as we move forward. So thank you very much, Jagruti. I know I've run about 5 minutes over, but I thought it's very important that I cover those key areas. And I will now pause there and maybe take any questions that might be there. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
No problem, Abdi. So, thank you so much, Abdi, for the wonderful keynote. So, we are open to questions. Either you can raise your hand or you can just add it to the chat section. So, we'll be taking only a couple of questions because we have a hard stop on different time. So, yeah, any questions, anyone? You can just put it over the chat section or just raise your hand. I can get you on stage. Anyone? Just raise your hand. You can find raise hand option. Okay, there's one question, Abdi, from Kartike. So, what do you think of customer experience becoming a USP for modern startups?
Yeah, I think of all the things that you can build a USP on, perhaps customer experience is one of the most powerful. Because what we have seen in the banking sector over the last few years is products get replicated very quickly. So the advantage you enjoy is temporary. It's very time bound, and it's mostly within 1 year. Generally, any product you put out there will be versions of it from competitors. And where you really can build sustainable competitive edge is around the end-to-end experience that your customer gets. What is the journey from the time they start to the end of whatever fulfillment they're looking for? In payments, for example, people talk of friction. How much friction does the client experience as they are trying to do whatever payment they're trying to execute? And I've seen amazing examples of startups that have put in solutions there that remove as much of the friction as possible, create a user-friendly interface, etc. So I think that is probably one of the most powerful competitive advantages that you can build and you can work on, in addition, of course, to innovating and staying ahead of the game.
Thank you, Abdi. I think that answered your question, Kartike. Any other question, anyone? Sorry. I don't think there's one in the Q&A. Okay. What are the key data challenges which Apsa Bank faces currently?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think one is the approach to data by most large organizations has been for internal use, often used for regulatory purposes, etc. So there is one of the challenges is just leadership culture and getting people to understand that data is a big deal. It's something that we need to use better. The other, kind of challenge that you look at is around systems. You find when you've been in business for as long as we have, you have multiple legacy systems, you have the core banking, you have a lot of new systems that have been created, and there are data sets all over the place. And one of the challenges is how to bring it all together and create a storyline, around the data as well. So that's another area that we continue to look at. I think another challenge that's not specific to APSA but relates to industry as a whole is that data as a science is a fairly new area, and therefore training, skill development, capability development is another area. There are very few good data scientists, especially in the continent, and that's another area that we continue to build on.
Thank you, Abdi, for the answer. I think we have more questions, but we are already on time. So, Abdi
Okay.
will be around. You can meet him, interact with him. He'll be here for some time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, with that, I would like to conclude this session. So, thank you so much, Abdi, for joining us, and hope you have a great time interacting and meeting different people in the lounges and around the conference.
Thank you, Jagruti. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
so we will now move on to the first panel discussion. I'll be at the backstage and bring my panelist over here on screen. You guys stay tuned for like a minute.